Alright guys, the second episode of The Bad Batch has officially dropped on Disney+, which means I gotta do my breakdown slash thoughts video on it. Now for those of you guys that are unfamiliar, these videos are a little bit less scripted and a little bit less structured. It's just me giving my thoughts on the episode, almost in sort of like a podcast style. I'm just gonna be talking and speaking my mind. And also just because of the way these episodes are set up, I will have to spoil all of episode 2 of The Bad Batch. So if you haven't seen it yet, make sure to watch that first, then come back here and watch the video. If you want more of my general thoughts on the series as a whole, make sure to check out the last video I did for episode 1, because I spend the first bit not going into too many spoilers and just giving my general thoughts on the series as a whole. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already, but now let's go ahead and discuss episode 2. So this episode definitely slowed things down compared to episode 1. I still did like it, but it was a little bit slow in my opinion. I still did enjoy it though, and I see why they slowed things down. I mean, just a couple of days ago we got this really big packed episode. It was 70 minutes long and just so much stuff happened within that one episode. Episode 1 felt more like a movie than a TV show, but episode 2 here definitely kind of returns to that classic Clone Wars style that we're used to. And I wouldn't want to call this episode filler, but I guess just not that much happens in terms of moving the plot forward. This episode is just meant to develop some of the relationships between our main characters here, specifically between Hunter and Omega. It looks like that relationship is going to be like the heart and soul of the show, and we're going to see them progress and grow over the course of the season. Now I gotta be completely honest, I'm not sure how I feel about that, just because it does remind me a little bit too much of the Mandalorian. I am just speculating right now, but it does seem like the way they're going, they're going to be doing that similar storyline that we've seen before, with that kind of cold and rugged old worn down soldier who's going to have this innocent child kind of warm his heart. We've seen that with Din Djarin and Grogu, and now we're kind of seeing a similar thing with Hunter and Omega. So it feels a little bit redundant in the Star Wars universe, especially since they're both Disney Plus series. But then again, this could completely take a massive twist and change things up. It is still different from the way the Mandalorian does it. That one was more about Din trying to get Grogu to a certain location and save him. This is more about them building a family and giving Omega a new home. So it is still different, it just feels a little bit too familiar. Also, I did think it was worth mentioning there were rumors about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which apparently also had a plot kind of similar to this, where I guess Obi-Wan would be taking care of a young child, which I think would be Luke, and that would kind of help him fix his cold and damaged heart. But then those same rumors stated that they actually scrapped that idea just because it was a little bit too similar to the Mandalorian. And now seeing the Bad Batch seeing kind of repeated over and over again this similar storyline, I'm pretty glad they went with that route. Either way though, I do still think it's a good concept for the show. Hunter seems like a very interesting protagonist, and he definitely seems like he's going to be like the main character of the show. The rest of the Bad Batch members were really cool as well, but really the relationship between Omega and Hunter was really highlighted in this episode, and it was nice to see him start to take these first steps of becoming sort of like a parent to Omega. And of course, the man teaching him all this stuff was Cut, who was making a return from the Clone Wars. His return wasn't all that special or anything, it was just really nice to see a character from the Clone Wars living their life after the Empire had taken over, especially his, because he is a clone trooper who defected, so he has a very unique story. His story arc did feel a little bit obvious, we all knew he was going to get his family out of there, but it was still cool to see him return. And he also did get that little piece of information about Rex, who did show up on Seleucami the day before, and I guess is trying to investigate this whole thing with the inhibitor chips. So that is a much more interesting storyline, and I'm hoping the next episode goes into that heavily. One of the things that stuck out to me in this episode though was the amount of world building. You really start to see the transition from clone trooper to stormtrooper. I know the clone troopers don't literally turn into stormtroopers, those are more conscription based and these are actual clones, but just in the way they act and talk, they just seem like stormtroopers. Like the way they're just being rude to everybody and they're so focused and in order and telling everybody to get in line, it just seemed very stormtrooper like. Like the clones that we see in this episode just feel so much more imperial than the way we've seen them in the Clone Wars, where they had a lot more personality. And that's a good thing, because that's exactly what this show is trying to illustrate. It's trying to show that transition from the Republic to the Empire. They're showing all this little piece of information, specifically with how they're removing the old ships like the V-Wing. We see a V-Wing getting taken away, and all this other stuff about giving citizens ID chips and registering them in the Empire. It just makes that transition from the Republic to the Empire feel a lot more realistic, and they definitely fill in a lot of these holes that I guess weren't really explained. One thing that I actually found a little bit weird with the clone troopers here was the way that they completely kind of turn into these robots. Like before they had all this personality and everything, and then their inhibitor chips get turned on, and then boom, they're like completely these stormtroopers that don't talk, they don't think, and they just seem like a bunch of standard troopers without any personality. And that's fine and everything, it does connect pretty well with season 7 of the Clone Wars, after we see clones like Jesse, when he turns on Rex and Ahsoka. He really does hate them, you know, and he doesn't regret what he did at all. But I'm somebody who grew up on like the old 2005 Battle Battlefront 2 game, and in that game there's this really cool part of the campaign where we hear clone troopers kind of talk about how they felt about killing all these Jedi, and how a lot of them actually regretted it and felt a lot of remorse. So yes, they were kind of tricked into doing it and they were programmed and everything, but they still lived through those moments and came out of them as themselves, so they remember doing all of that which they actually regret. And part of this was actually illustrated in the current canon with those Kanan Jarrus comic books. In those comics we actually get to see a couple of clone troopers who killed Master Deepa Billaba, and in that we get to see a couple of clone troopers talk about how they felt about what they just did. One of the clones regrets it heavily and the other one is just trying to talk him out of it, but at the end of the day they do still regret and feel the things they did, whereas in this show they are kind of robotic and I guess aren't that remorseful. Either way is fine, to be honest. I kind of just preferred that way that was previously illustrated in the comic. At the end of the day, things in the comics and the books are going to get retconned all the time just because there's no real communication between the creators of those and the creators of these shows and the movies. It's kind of like a hierarchy to this, right? There's like the movies, then the TV series, and then the comic books and everything else. Like J.J. Abrams can just do whatever he wants, and then Dave Filoni has to kind of walk around that and fix it. And then Dave Filoni can also do whatever he wants, and the comic book writers are going to have to try and dance around that as well. So either way, there's always like these mini retcons going on in the Star Wars universe, but for the most part, it's a very intact, and there's only a few little occurrences like this. But yeah, overall, I thought it was an okay episode. I'm really hoping the next week's episode and the rest of the episodes in this season aren't this slow. Like, we got this episode a few days after we got the first one, so I guess that's fine and everything. But since we're only going to be getting one episode a week, it seems like, I really want that one episode to have a lot more content in it. Like, this episode did kind of remind me of some of the episodes of The Mandalorian or even WandaVision, where kind of like nothing really happened and it didn't really progress the plot forward at all. But again, that's completely okay in this situation because we did just get a bunch of content at once, and this is only a few days after that. Also, I forgot to mention, it was pretty cool seeing Omega progress through this episode. The way that she's kind of turning more into a member of the Bad Batch, like the way that she took off her little headpiece there and kind of let her hair down so it's all messy and everything. She's starting to reflect what Hunter and the rest of the Bad Batch kind of teach her. Like, I fully expect by the end of the season for her look to be completely different. It's probably going to be all messy and dirty, similar to the Bad Batch and how they look. I'm still hoping that she will be a Force user. That is still my prediction. It hasn't changed from this episode. They even talked about how she's special in some way and she was made with a purpose. I do believe that purpose was to use the Force and help bring back Palpatine in some way. I know, right? Super hot take, but watch, it's going to be true. I'm calling it right now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much going to do it for this video. It's going to be a little bit shorter. This episode was shorter in general, so there's just not that much to talk about. But make sure to let me know what you guys thought about episode 2 of the Bad Batch and what do you guys think is going to happen in episode 3. Also, what's your take on the Bad Batch as a whole so far? How are you guys enjoying the series? But yeah, that will pretty much do it for me, and I guess I'll catch you guys tomorrow in the next video. Peace.